A very good evening to everyone who's joined us today. I welcome you all for this talk on behalf of Anveshan. And so today's talk is a bit different. It's going to be a book discussion come talk. And the book is titled Election Commission of India, Institutionalizing Democratic Uncertainties. And the talk is titled Institutional and Structural Erosion of Democracy in India. And we have with us the co-authors of the book as speakers. So the first speaker is Professor Anupama Roy. She teaches at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And we have with us Professor Ujjwal Kumar Singh, who teaches at the Delhi University. And the talk will be moderated by Dr. Dhananjay Rai, who is an assistant professor at the Central University of Gujarat. So over to you, Dhananjay.
I'm delighted to be part of this debate and this book discussion and talk. And thank you, Anveshan, for organizing this required and substantive talk come discussion on the book, Election Commission of India, Institutionalizing Democratic Uncertainties by two distinguished political scientists, Professor Anupama Roy and Professor Ujjwal Kumar Singh. The book was published in 2019 by Oxford University Press, and Professor Ujjwal Singh and Professor Anupama Roy need no introduction to this audience. And the book is remarkable summation of election. I'll give some brief introduction of the debate, and so we can have some, and then we will have a discussion and a debate by Professor Roy and Professor Singh. The book is remarkable summation of the Election Commission of India. This is the body which used to have highest approval of people in many surveys. There's a remarkable journey in the book encapsulating pivotal concern of post-independence India. Rather than subsumption of state over all institution or all institutions are behaving completely independently, there is a much more complicated history and trajectory as exhibited by the book. Slew of concerns by way of the book invites immediate attention, and I think the Convention is the right forum to discuss those attention. That structuration within the state while retaining the distinct identity. There's a very important conceptual theorization by Professor Roy and Professor Singh. That is the idea of paradox, and this paradox is very, very pertinent in the context of election commission or any institution. That at the one level it is indistinguishable from the state, but at another level galvanizing consent and dissent through democratic mobilization. And there is a very important assertion by Professor Roy and Professor Singh that there's a radical, this institution becomes very important, or particularly Election Commission of India, like a radical uncertainty about authority, which provides a radical uncertainty about authority through certainty of procedures. So these are the important summation, and these are the important concerns of our time, that the radical uncertainty and certainty of procedures to make the democracy and democratization more robust. And the audience and the participant in this debate must be aware of the various concepts like embedded autonomy or relative autonomy of the state, or relative autonomy of the institution. And here and this book really becomes significant on those terms. I have spoke a lot on the book. I invite Professor Anupama Roy and Professor Ujjwal Singh for their distinguished talk discussion on the book.
Okay, so I'll begin by thanking everybody at Anveshan for inviting both of us to discuss the book. The book was published in 2019, which basically means that the entire process of writing this book happened about a year before it was published. So the book does not talk about the 2019 elections. The book is not about elections in any case, but that is something that would be a glaring absence in the written text of the book. But I'm sure, in the course of the discussion, those aspects of electoral governance can, of course, be discussed. We started working on this book quite a while back, and when I was in CWDS and Ujjwal was a fellow in Nehru Memorial Library, and the book got written over a period of time. In between, we did other different work, and we got back to the book in earnest in around 2017 and 18. So that's when the major portions of the book were written. And the idea behind writing this book, and this is something that confronts us when we teach students, particularly courses on political institutions. And one of the things that we grapple with is how must we study public institutions and political institutions? What are the questions that need to be asked? And what are the larger questions of approach and perspective that needs to be built into those questions? So while writing the book, we were also concerned about the larger questions of studying an institution like the Election Commission, which Dhananjay said very appropriately is an institution of a different kind. It's part of the apparatus of the state, in particularly the bureaucratic apparatus of the state. But there is also an inherent tendency in the Election Commission, which can be traced to its historical origins in the constituent movement, where it's kind of crafting a distinctive identity of its own. So it's part of the structure of the state. It has all the accoutrements of the state, the ways in which the rules, procedures, and organizational practices have got entrenched over a period of time, show that it kind of replicates what would be essentially the features of state-centered bureaucracy. But it also has been part of the logic of democracy, in the sense that the primary purpose of this institution and the primary responsibility of this institution is to ensure regime change without conflict and through the democratic exercise of choice by people. So that way it's embedded in the logic of democracy of the state, even when it is located within the domain of the state. So when we study an institution like the Election Commission, it's important to look at this paradox of an institution which has elicited enormous amount of trust over a period of time, but at the same time, the outcome of an election and the installation of a regime and another institution like the parliament does not enjoy the kind of trust that paradox is something that we need to also be looking at. The simultaneity, if one can term it, borrowing from Yogendra Yadav, of participation of people in a process which they trust, but a simultaneous alienation from the outcome. There is, therefore, another paradox that we...
There was some disruption from one of the participants. I'm sorry, I removed them.
Yeah. Now, so as I said earlier, what is the methodology that we used in studying the Election Commission as an institution? We an institution can be studied, subjected to an anthropological inquiry by itself, the way in which the institution has evolved over a period of time. So that would be one way of looking at an institution. The other could be to look at the institution as an analytical unit and take that institution as a lens to study and explain other phenomena. So that could be another purpose of an objective of studying an institution. Now, when we studied the institution, the Election Commission, one of the things that we did was to conduct brief field visits to Jammu, in particular districts of Riyasi and Kathua, and a field visit to Patna, and another field visit to Karnataka. And these visits were primarily to look at the way in which election is conducted at the level of districts, because that's where the manner in which governance happens, and the district level governance of elections and the state level governance of elections is planned and unfolds. So that was one reason we went to the districts. We did not speak to chief election commissioners, but we had access to what they had written, and we also had access to what the Election Commission has produced as volumes of its narrative reports. So from the first election, general election onwards, right up to 1983, the Election Commission has written narrative reports of the elections that it has conducted. And those narrative reports were not a requirement, in the sense a procedural requirement of what the Election Commission ought to be doing. But the Election Commission thought it necessary, the first Chief Election Commissioner, Kumar thought it necessary to prepare and chronicle in terms of an institutional memory of how the Election Commission conducts its business. And also one of the purposes was to learn from the documentation that happens over a period of time, and correct wherever the institution may have gone wrong. So from 1951 up to 1983, we have a historical chronicling, in the words of the Election Commission, the ways in which the Election Commission has conducted election, and through these narrative reports, one actually gets an insight into the ways in which the Election Commission identifies itself as a body, and one sees that there is a distinct attempt to not locate itself in the nexus of governmental practices that are located in the state itself. So there is an explicit distancing from the state to carve out an identity which would be different from the identity of public power associated with the state. Now, when we studied the first general election through these narrative reports, but also from the newspaper archives of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library from 1950 to 52 to look at how the conduct of elections was being talked about in the public domain. And it was a surprise to see that, unlike the present context where the Election Commission seems to dominate the newspaper broadsheet, not only when elections are conducted, but also the intervening period between elections, the Election Commission seems to be absent in the newspapers of those 2 years, even though there is an interest in elections and what the political leaders are doing. And one of the reasons, as Sukumar Sen himself says in the narrative report of the first general election, that the purpose of the Election Commission was to participate in a national task, and the national task of conducting an election did not really involve being out there in the public domain. And there was a kind of anxiety over the way in which the entrenchment of the institution was happening. So the anxiety over the putting in place of procedures and rules and laws that would facilitate and enable the conduct of elections. So he's wary with the piecemeal way in which the electoral law is being framed by the legislature. And there is this the way in which the Election Commission is making decisions in anticipation of what the legislature is going to decide, and taking recourse to the draft constitution that is being prepared. So that's the and it's actually interesting to see how an incipient model code of conduct is already there in terms of the way in which the instructions are being issued out by the Election Commission to its officials for conducting the election. So the first general election was an important signpost for us to look at the way in which the moment of the rupture from the colonial context into the moment of the transformative, where historical legacies of past wrongs are to be rolled back, was to be actualized in the electoral domain. Now, there are, in terms of the normative framework, there are three kinds of analytical categories that we have looked at. The first analytical category is of election time, and the idea of election time is something that we have extracted from different ways in which the electoral process has been looked at. And one of the ways in which Professor Dennis Thompson has looked at election time is to look at election as a moment of rupture, and a moment of rupture and discontinuity from normal politics. So he says that the elections signify a temporal disrupture, a temporal dissonance from normal politics. And why do they signify this moment of rupture is because election time is itself constituted differently. And he attributes three characteristics to election time, saying that it has an element of periodicity, it has an element of simultaneity, and it has an element of finality, which basically means that the element of periodicity would mean that the dead weight of past majority is substituted by the majorities that are constituted at particular historical moments. Simultaneity would mean that when everybody is voting together, there is an emphatic and tangible majority, historical majority, that is constituted at that moment in time, and not serialized majorities that are constituted over a period of time. And finality would mean that everybody submits to that. And it's the important point about election time is precisely that if these rhythms of election time are ensured through procedures, then other things follow. Other things like civic engagement, other things like questions of legitimacy, in questions of trust in the electoral process would follow, to the extent these rhythms have actually been able to actualize themselves and crystallize themselves in the electoral process. David Gilmartin, however, has a different perspective. When he talks about election time, he talks about election time as a point of reversal, and a point of reversal of the normal working of power, which gets replaced by new regimes of power to unleash popular sovereignty. And this new regime of power is again procedural, and procedural because there is a regulation, a legal regulation of the electoral process in order to ensure that people are able to exercise their franchise in an unfettered way. So unlike the state of exception in Agamben, where it is sovereign power that is in reinforced, popular sovereignty gets reinforced through legal exceptionalism that obtains at the time of election. And then there is a third way in which election time is looked at, where Nadia Urbanati, for example, talks about election time as an electoral trial, where electoral competition is important, but the election time is a moment where the contests over representation happen, which have a deliberative quality, and these contests are important for going beyond the here and now of the election. So, and all of these three actually converge to in terms of talking in terms of what would be the procedural content of elections, and procedural content connected with the outcomes in terms of democratic representation, which leads us to questions of substantive questions of democracy. And the model code of conduct, for example, is the most important instantiation of how election time makes itself or materializes in the way in which the Election Commission conducts elections, has conducted elections, especially post-emergency 1979, when the Election Commission's own model code of conduct was implemented. A second category that we have worked with is the category of in some ways election development maybe, but that's the category the Election Commission itself uses. There is a larger set of literature, Electoral Integrity, that talks about election enforcement and how democratic deficits in elections may be overcome through electoral governance. And one of the innovations, for example, of the Election Commission through voter education programs, which is known as SWEEP, the Election Commission has evolved what are called electoral best practices, which kind of correspond to a new way in which the election management bodies are looked at across the world. However, in the context of India, these best practices are not seen in terms of an enforcement activity. They're seen more in terms of, again, quite like the MCC, to fill a gap in maybe electoral in law governing the electoral process, where there is no law asking people to vote compulsorily, and how is it that people can actually be persuaded to come out and vote. And our visit to Riyasi in Jammu helped us understand how actually the process of sweep works at the district level. And in this particular visit in Riyasi, and then again, this was after the general elections of 2014. In the context of state assembly elections in Jammu in December 2014, and in the general elections in Riyasi district, which was carved out of Udhampur, and it was one of those districts which was vulnerable for various reasons, including the fact that a third of its population is below the poverty line. Manrega is the most prominent source of employment, and Vaishno Devi pilgrimage is another source of employment. And it was also vulnerable because it was because of extremist activities in that region over a period of time, particularly after the 1990s, which made the context in which elections were held in Riyasi, particularly after 1990s, fragile. And in the 2014 general elections, there was almost a doubling of the electoral turnout from 41% to 81%. And the district, the officer who conducted the elections in Riyasi was awarded one of those best practices award by the Indian government. But the insights from the field in Riyasi told us that there were the different kinds of meanings that people held out, or people attributed to the vote, saying that perhaps this doesn't mean that we have voted. We have voted, but this vote is not about regime endorsement. It is a vote which is more in terms of a claim. We voted with sentiment, jaddo-jahat or jazbaat ke saath. We have voted, and this vote is now a claim that we present to the government, and this claim is for something which is which is an essential requirement for all people. So we want schools for our children, and we talked to people in the upper ranges of Pir Panjal Hills, from in a small village called Sungri, and the terrain were actually quite treacherous. The hills were crumbling down as we drove to Sungri, and these people were poor, belonging largely to the nomadic Bakarwal community, and they said that they voted for employment, they voted for schools for their children, and they voted for hospitals. So the claims from the vote were not about regime endorsement, but they were about the essentials in life that people would want. So and then again, I think, I'm sure Ujjwal would talk about that more, in terms of the way in which at the levels of the state and at the level of the districts, how different kinds of convergences happen of the administrative apparatus in the district, and for example, Manrega funds and funds that are given for different projects, and how there is a kind of a collaboration with private actors, with banks, with post offices, and how durable infrastructures are also created in the process. So the election time would mean different things to different people. Now, I'll end with the last point, and that has to do with the way in which this entire discussion has been conceptualized in terms of how is it, what or how is the Election Commission located in the political field of power that obtains in in a democracy. And one of the things that I'm going to suggest is that there is an enormous possibility of how the Election Commission interprets its power of conducting election, and that has to do again with the way in which Article 324 of the Constitution of India gives the Election Commission the powers, and how that has over a period of time got elaborated and interpreted by the judiciary. So Article 324 is then an important resource for the Election Commission in terms of both the rules of recognition for its powers and what is it that validates its authority, but how it's been interpreted over a period of time to make Article 324 not just the powers that the Election Commission has if the parliament does not claim those powers through law, but an enormous repository of powers into which the election commission can dip in periodically to buttress its own powers of executive decisions or rule making and rule implementation. And this article is also a source of contestation between the parliament and the election commission that we have that we have observed over a period of time, and for an institution to reinforce the positive feedback or trust or legitimacy that an institution has enjoyed over a period of time, it would be important to, within the framework of historical institutionalism or path dependence that we see in studying institutions, to look at those positive reinforcements and how the issue of legitimacy and trust can be an institution can endure, can continue claiming those attributes by doing what it had done before. So I'll end here and ask Dhananjay to invite the next speaker.
Over to you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess I have less time, which is good, because I'm going to flag certain issues. Which probably we're all concerned about. There are so many important developments. So if you take up today's newspaper, Indian Express, you have two important items on elections. One is on the business page, where there's whole issue of electoral bonds, which has been bothering us for quite a long time. Even Election Commission of India had earlier raised issues, there were concerns. And then there's about elections, how elections could be held during COVID times. So Election Commission of India guidelines, especially in the context of upcoming Bihar elections. But if you've seen in the last few months, there was a news item about one of the election commissioners who quit. He's joining a bank as such, but and that's done with the permission of the government of India. But Lavasa decided to quit election, and which is only second instance where election commissioner is going to quit, and in all probability would have become chief election commissioner at some stage. So when our book was prepared, remember studying institutions, we also focused and primarily focused upon how election commission played an important role in sort of forging Indian democracy, at least the institutional part. And when Anveshan gave us the following title, Institutional and Structural Erosion of Democracy in India, that changed the narrative, because one had to rethink and look at those aspects, those structures, those processes, which are not farmed up, which actually are open for, maybe one can say, abuse at some point of time, but where there's possibility that this may lead to erosion, and which is happening. So, for example, when we take up Lavasa's case, when Ashok Lavasa, when he decided to put up the papers. So look at the connections, interconnections. So he was a dissenter in the election commission body, where he decided not to accept the viewpoints of other two members on a violation of model code of conduct by one of the leader of the BJP, who became Prime Minister Modi, and who was the then Prime Minister in the last regime, and Amit Shah, now the Home Minister. So there was a dissent given by Ashok Lavasa. It went through number process, but it was recorded, but not put into open. So here you have a dissenter. He was a bureaucrat. He's a part of constitutional body. You cannot remove him, bless you, in normal circumstances. And he gives a dissent, and then you'll have newspaper reports about ED or income tax going after his family members. So see, I mean, it's widely people do understand that there are extraneous pressure being put on constitutional functionaries. So if you ask whether this is proven or not, nothing could be proved. But the very fact that a person gives a dissent and then there are cases against, they may be true or false, we don't know, shows that there is a design flaw when it comes to the Constitution of Election Commission of India. Now, it wasn't meant to be. Remember, there was Chief Election Commissioner and later 2 other election commissioners were added. And there's a stringent provision for removal of Chief Election Commissioner that we know. It's just like impeachment of Supreme Court judge. It's impossible to remove. However, when it comes to appointment, even a statutory body like Nhrc, which say, remember the incumbent, the person who is now heading, ex-Chief Justice of India, Justice Dattu, he himself is a toothless tiger. Fine. Having said that, there is a mechanism for appointment of Nhrc chief, because what you do, you go through a process where leader of opposition is there, so opposition members are there, independent members are there, Prime Minister, Home Minister are there, and so there's a body which goes into this merits and they appoint Nhrc chief over there. Likewise with CVC. But constitutional body like CAG, constitutional body like election commissioners, you don't have this process. It's the president who appoints, and of course it appoints on the basis of recommendation given by the government of the day. So one issue which we are bringing before, and which we all aware, see, till the time things work, we close our eyes, but there was always this flaw over there, and there is a need to look into this very seriously. At least the model which has been come for NHRC. Remember, NHRC Act was amended only last year, so one can actually amend Representation of People Act and show that certain statutory principles are brought in over there. So we start with this very uneasy feeling that one of the election commissioners has resigned, and there'll be state elections, and the person who's taken over, you remember yesterday, Rajiv Kumar, he will be the Chief Election Commissioner for 2024 elections. So it's something which we need to be keep in mind, and maybe there has to be some effort to bring in institutional mechanism for appointment of chief election commissioners, like what we have for CBC, and at least that's what we have for CBC and for NHRC chiefs. Incidentally, while reading about DMA Act, Disaster Management Act, and there's a wonderful report on Disaster Management Act, there's a whole history over there. In Sri Lanka, when this body is constituted, the advisory body, there are 5 members from the opposition party. So you have members from ruling party, members from opposition party. So there are different models. So we can actually learn from different models. We are supposed to be largest democracy in that sense, but smaller democracies also give us some, good lessons as such. Okay, so that was something which I wanted to bring in, which is absolutely important. But keeping in mind the time in which we are living, the COVID time. Now, what happened? These are special times where certain regulations would come in, and it has not happened there. But I have a concern. We actually see a concern over there that many times certain rules, regulations, principles which are brought during special times, exceptional times, extraordinary times, they tend to become permanent. Fine, because and there's not much debate on this, because widely people accept that what else can we do? This is fait accompli. These are difficult times. We have to save lives, and let's accept this. So if you look at EC guidelines for the election during pandemic times, keeping in mind the Bihar election, there's something very important which EC is doing, absolutely important, and we stand by the principle that elections must be held. If you defer elections, there's a different debate about that, but elections must be held, and certain precautions must be taken. Now, the important point is what we had was Election Commission of India. During election time, it's Election Commission of India and Representation of People Act. That was the dominant order. The rate of Election Commission of India ran. Even judiciary did not interfere. That's there as a part of Constitution. So all disputes could be taken up once election time was over. That's the constitutional principle as such. Now what you'll have, and there lies the apprehension. I mean, we can't say at this stage that something wrong will go, but the apprehension is that Disaster Management Act is another layer of law which exists along with the constitutional provisions 324 to 329, and in all probability, Disaster Management Act will overrule whatever Election Commission of India does, because every time, and we have been following this, all notification of Election Commission of India. Remember, there were election in Maharashtra, legislative council elections, legislative council elections in Madhya Pradesh and other states, and every time Election Commission of India was referring to DMA Act, and all notifications come from the Home Ministry. So it's a centralizing legislation. So states may have some leeway to go about in terms of hospital beds and things like this, but they all will have to follow the instructions given by Home Ministry under Disaster Management Act. So if you look at the notification of Election Commission of India, August 2020, which came a couple of days back, what you have is under Section 30, campaign by political parties contesting candidates, Clause G says, non-compliance of instructions. Anybody violating instructions on COVID-19 measures will be liable to be proceeded against as per the provision of Section 51 to Section 60 of the Disaster Management Act, besides legal action under Section 188 of IPC, which actually is part of DMA Act, and other legal provisions as applicable as specified. Order dated 43/2020, dated 29 July 2020 of Ministry of Home. So they are referring to this in terms of instruction. But remember, other instructions may come from Home Ministry. Under Disaster Management Act, it is Home Ministry which is nodal agency, and in special circumstances, it's Prime Minister who can take all decisions. So we actually looking at a very, very centralizing process over here. And during this, we will have elections. So we need to be cautious. We need to be vigilant on this, what kind of guidelines come. So we have to keep an eye on Election Commission of India as well as on the Home Ministry guidelines which are coming. So that's something which I wanted to flag. And the other things over there, which honestly, as a concerned citizen, we must welcome. That number of vehicles should be less, number of people campaigning should be less, fine? It's not only about DMA Act, it's also about show of strength, fine? Another concern which was raised by political parties was about this virtual mode of campaigning, because it's about your resources. So richer political parties and political party actually, because BJP has really got bulk of the electoral bonds, bulk of the money it has gone to BJP. So those who have financial strength, they would be using this virtual mode, in a way which completely takes away initiative from smaller parties. But well, that's the fair system, market system. So one can raise issues, concerns about that, but one has to really raise issues. Where is this political financing coming from, right? And there lies the problem. So the next issue which I wanted to bring before all of you was this whole issue of financing, fine? Who finances, and then so about the electoral bonds. Now, if you remember, if you take up reporting which came in Indian Express today, according to the audited financial accounts of political parties till March 31, 2019, BJP received 1,660.89 crore through electoral bonds, followed by Congress party's collection of 388.26. I mean, see the gap. It's like 6 times the difference in terms of between A major party and B major party. Out of total collection of rupees 2,753.67 crore by national and state political parties, And this is the data provided by Finance Ministry in Parliament. So this data is authentic. It's placed in the Parliament. This news item actually talks about that, there is a whole cycle of, when electoral bonds are open in the market. So most probably it will come up in October, just before Bihar elections. And then the whole issues around that. The final Supreme Court has not finally settled the issue. Even within the Election Commission initially took a stand that there's opacity over there. It's against principle of transparency, and to the extent on money power, ECI said, and this is O.P. Rawat. This is cited in our book on page 323. So O.P. Rawat, who was former Chief Election Commissioner, he said that they had seized a record amount of money during elections, including the assembly elections in 5 states, which concluded in December 2018, where close to 200 crore in cash was seized by ECI. And he was speaking in the context of demonetization, because demonetization is seen as one measure which has taken away corruption and all, but Chief Election Commissioner is actually pointing out that this has not affected funding and all kind of fundings which are going into elections. Fine. So they seized 200 crore of illegal money as such. So we need to be, there has to be more questions asked about electoral bonds because it's amended Companies Act, it amended numerous other acts. Third, and I think I'm running out of time, so Dhananjay, you must caution me. Another which is absolutely important, and there is no answer. Let's be very frank on this. There is no answer. This whole thing about virtual campaigning, social media, and who controls, who can manage, not control actually, who can regulate. So there was, kind of voluntary code of ethics which came up before last general election. And I'm going to talk something about this. So all I would suggest everyone to see the linkages, because we have to look at the interconnections. So it's not an accident. Many of us knew it was happening, that Wall Street Journal actually piece states that Facebook, because of business concern, was going soft on Hindu communalist. So those who are on Facebook, those who are on social media, they actually see how brutally those who question the ruling authorities are trolled, what kind of abuses they face. So, because in a political culture where there's this kind of, divide, where there's a hatred, where there's a communal, divide as such, it's going to affect our elections. So we are not talking about perfect elections, because perfect election would mean a very disciplined society, controlled society, an election which is completely based upon surveillance. Because our easy answer for everything is connect to UID, Aadhaar, fine? And even Election Commission, they have actually seeded large number of, electoral rolls with Aadhaar. So, and we have seen that, Aadhaar does help in certain ways, but the entire crisis of during COVID with the migrant labor crisis, we have seen that it's not technology which will give us answer. It's actually people who are on the field who are going to provide secure or provide support, and that's going to help. Fine. It's not just technology that you put in your Aadhaar and you get a ration card. That's not going to happen. It did help, no doubt. So we need to be really cautious about social media platforms. So we are aware, and the debate still is there in USA. What extent, to what extent, and what kind of influence did Russians have in US election, right? Many of us would say, okay, why should China be interested, or Pakistan, or USA and Russia be interested? No, everyone will be interested, in an electoral outcomes. So do we have mechanisms? So what mechanism we have? What former Chief Election Commissioner S.Y. Qureshi also wrote yesterday in one column, that there is a voluntary code of ethics. So now what you have is Election Commission of India through Internet and Mobile Association of India, IMAI. So that was the body which actually signed the agreement. The social media platforms, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Google, ShareChat, TikTok, they came into arrangement that, and these certain principles they arrived at, that, they are going to ensure fair play, and which are, whatever principle they arrived at, that's pretty fair enough. There's no question mark on that. So they would voluntarily undertake information, education, and communication campaigns to build awareness about electoral laws and other related. High priority to dedicated grievance redressal channel for expeditious action on cases reported by ECI. Social media platforms have developed a notification mechanism. By this, ECI can notify the relevant platforms of potential violations of Section 126 of RP Act 1951 and other electoral laws, and likewise, so on and so forth. Now, if you look at the actually Representation of People Act, it's an important document. It's a very important document, thin set of law. Every time you read, you'll be surprised that actually they have covered nearly everything. So when they're referring to 126, one of the issue is there. 126B is offenses by companies. So actually, social media companies, they are actually put in over there, right? This whole thing about, remember, affidavit, when you put up your background affidavit and goes on the website, it was already there in the Representation of People Act. Question to be asked is, when the law is there, are you really following up? And let's take up all these model code of conduct. So I won't speak anything more about this, but just about this. Here is, that's why all members who are here, our narrative is not just like unipolar, where actually we are going to critique Election Commission of India because we've seen its function very efficiently. It has enhanced democracy, but there are gaps. And gaps are not because Election Commission of India has not taken initiative. Election Commission of India works along with other institutions, right? It works with other bodies. So when Election Commission of India banned Kapil Mishra from poll campaign for 48 hours because of hate speech, don't you think that was sufficient ground for police, when they're going after rioters in Northeast Delhi, to actually take cognizance of this ban? Because remember, it's a constitutional body which has taken cognizance, which has noted that this is a hate speech and banned an important leader and said you cannot campaign 48 hours. But how come police is completely silent on this when they're filing cases on charge sheet? Fine. So at least you can take cognizance, you can note one constitutional body, what they have spoken, what action they have taken, and follow. In fact, what I read was Delhi police registered an FIR against Mishra under Representation of People Act 1951, following Director of the Election Commission of India. The real challenge for those who do research, those who want to follow this, is during election time, the number of cases filed under Model Code of Conduct. They are reported by Election Commission of India, fine. You actually can see on the website, so many cases of violation of Model Code of Conduct, cases filed. But what happens, because once election time is over, it's no longer Election Commission which is following up this. Their task is over. Because ultimately, Election Commission during election time is not just few members sitting in Delhi. It's about entire bureaucratic machinery which is there from top to district level. And the district magistrate becomes the district electoral officer. So till that time, they keep tap of this. They ensure that there's an efficient mechanism which works. But once that is over, the follow-up is not there. Now, follow-up the regular administration has to do. So you'll find, cases after cases been filed, some cases of sedition against, some politician at some point of time, against some candidates, under excise law, under, defacement of wall act, all those things which is there. But someone will have to follow, fine, what has happened after that? Because until we follow up thing after election is over, and that may take time, that may take 5 years, because election disputes go till 5 years, 10 years. In fact, by the time actually person has served in assembly or parliament, and then judiciary comes its verdict. But if you follow, at least we can ensure that Election Commission is following the rules, because rules are robust. That we have to see, right? So wider political culture, social media, remember, we do not have because they basically, Election Commission of India worked with them, came to arrangement, and it's voluntary. But if you look at the ordinary penal code, so how come you can actually ask Vinod Dua and file a sedition case with one Facebook Live program, or you actually file a case against Siddharth Varadarajan with one tweet? How come same regime takes that very seriously, but hate campaigns of enormous, that is not followed up? So remember, there's no magic weapon where you bring in new laws to deal with that. Idea is to actually enforce the existing laws, and this has to be done by the personnel who are there, the regime which is there. So that could be. Dhananjay, is it over? Or are you going to give me 2 minutes?
You have to. You take it.
Okay. Because interesting, we really want to learn from people over here. Again, what COVID, and I'm emphasizing COVID because I think it's an important moment, because many things which we took for granted, now the vulnerabilities are coming to open. So election is just one part of this entire process as such, a very important part of it. So entire crisis of migrant labor which unfolded, it was painful, it was brutal in many ways, it was completely abandonment of the poorer, the laboring, the working masses by the ruling elite and even the establishment. It was so stark. But that reminds us what happens to their votes. So we are aware that elections were not held, but elections will be held in Bihar. But it's not about COVID only alerted us to the fact. But the fact is, most of the migrant laborers do not have a voting right, because when you go out for work in some urban areas, some big contract, you go for border road, you don't actually get the election identity card. Reason is, and anyone who's made election ID card, anyone who's made ration card is aware that you need address proof. And address proof is very difficult to get. So, my own mother, who is here, 90-year-old, we could not change the address because, there's no document in her name. So, it is such a huge crisis. And you're talking about 13 crore, fine? Minimum, this is 2017 data, 13.9 crore of internal migrants in this country, right? Nearly 90 crores are enrolled in the electoral roll. Nearly 23 crore are not enrolled. So if we talk about electoral process and electoral management, the document which is most important, is electoral roll. And electoral roll, remember, the day we start, playing politics with electoral roll, there our electoral democracy will go downhill. Whether it's on line of communal division, whether in terms of class exclusion, fine. So that's the sacrosanct document for elections. So the sanctity of electoral roll is so important. How it is prepared, whether there's oversight over this or not. So delimitation and electoral roll is important, and there lies concern, because given the political culture in which we live, if there's disenfranchisement of certain section, then that will be a real loss of democracy. So these are certain things which we need to keep in mind, the vulnerabilities, and which may lead to erosion of, and in certain ways it has, with one election commissioner resigning, it's a huge dent in the image of the Election Commission of India. So I think this time I must thank Anveshan for inviting us. It is back to you, Dr. Dhananjay Rai.
Thank you so much, Professor Anupama Roy, Professor Ujjwal Singh, for your very, very important and required discussion and debate on both institution and democracy. We have, since you have to leave by 7:30, we have many questions. We will take a few questions for your comments. So how to go about it? Should I read or as you suggest?
I think it's best if you read, yeah.
I'll summarize. The questions are really long. And Santosh Kumar is asking that it is not so that I mean, he's saying that we have many election commissioners like Session and Lavasa, but most of the bureaucrats are also working under pressure of successive governments. While this regime is in its urge to groom a personality cult has made this rampant and apparent. So how do you look at the role of election commissions and the nature of regime? The question pertains to this.
Okay.
So shall I? Yeah, that's an important question because when we go through scholarly works on the Election Commission, and even normal conversations, everybody refers to TN Session, and the way in which TN Session symbolized a rupture in the functioning of the Election Commission. There would be an argument to say that TN Session's TN Session's Chief Election Commissionership was a point of coincidence of several forces. Where you had a person who had a lot of ideas about how the electoral process should be reformed. Two, there was a way in which the democratic churnings had reconfigured the political field so that the electoral competition itself had become more plural and there was no monolithic political field in some ways. So there was a coincidence of several tendencies at that point in time. And then there were a series of election commissioners who were able to consolidate what TN Session initiated in the 1990s, right up to Lingdo and after that as well. But the problem is that, again, as I said earlier, that there is a certain kind of publicness that happens with chief election commissioners in a context where an institution is under public scrutiny. There were other chief election commissioners earlier who were equally defiant and equally imaginative in terms of how the work of electoral governance should happen, who are not iconized in the same way. So in 1967, you had when perhaps the first democratic upsurge happened. You had T.T. Swaminathan, S.P. Sengupta as a chief election commissioner, who is talking about the electoral space as a space of dialectics and talking about 1967 elections as having provided that space of dialectics. And he says that that space of dialectics is very important to make elections into an actual arena of choice. So you have this person who's writing about this in a narrative report, but there is no publicity of a 67 regime of election commission. 1978, again, a defiant election commission whose posters actually say, vote without fear, your vote is secret, which could be almost like an insurgent election commission saying that you come out and vote however you want and nobody will bother you. So again, and that was T.T. Swaminathan. So there were other chief election commissioners as well. And then as research scholars, and we need to kind of comb through the ways in which these details have been the way in which Election Commission has responded to different political contexts. So 1990s was important because of the coincidence of different forces, but there were other kind of innovations that were actually happening. So that's how I would respond. Unless you
there is a question from there. Siddharth has asked 3-4 questions, but I think you have responded to 2 at least. Covering Santosh's questions. Siddharth's question is, which needs your comment actually. What do you think that election commission role should be in case of Bihar election in order to acknowledge the vast disadvantage several parties would face in campaigning?
What should be? In many ways we should persist, because as academician, we also analyze. We may have a normative position, like elections must be held. I know political parties who are opposed to that because there's a serious threat of COVID, and so maybe this not time. Some parties have taken a position that it may be shifted later. Especially because most of us are from university and colleges, from education over here. The whole crisis whether exam should be held or not, and who will carry this burden if the aspirants, the candidates suffer. The entire debate which is taking place in USA, where they're opening up schools and the vulnerability of children has increased. So those issues are there. But see, they're specific to COVID. That's one part of the question. Another is larger, the larger thing which we have been talking about. So if political parties are differentially praised because they have different resources, and this being perennial debate whether you fund, whether there should be state funding or not, and with electoral bond coming, what has added is the lack of transparency has increased. So only if you fund, then you can actually put in 100 big screens. I mean, I would love to see one of those big screens. I can't I don't know. They are, I believe, so expensive that only major parties with a lot of funding can afford it. But other measures which Election Commission of India has, formulated, they really make sense, because in COVID times, they're asking for, all those rules, regulations which must be followed in terms of safety, masks, gloves, etc. But the larger concerns which we raised is as much applicable to Bihar and probably more, fine? Because now we'll have less of scrutiny, less members of parties inside looking at things. It will be more time consuming, probably election will be more staggered. So a simple fact is, earlier with one polling station, there were around 1,500 voters, now there will be 1,000. So they'll have to increase polling stations. And in terms of counting also, they need more big halls. So the logistic would increase. Rest in terms of party campaigns, now that's completely our personal viewpoint. There's nothing better than the campaign which is done at the field level. I mean, major leaders have taken padyatras in this country, fine? With 2-3 people, you don't need that majma with that. And probably something very interesting what S.Y. Qureshi wrote, that this whole idea which we have completely forgotten, where there was some wall messages, some paintings under this very sanitized election, we have completely removed that. Maybe it's a time that should be back. Honestly, I think what happens in a Gali Mohalla, some walls are actually sold to parties, right? You can put it over there. So the old ways of campaigning should be back. So I think now everyone is actually putting the bet on social media campaigns, on virtual campaigns, which probably plays a very important role. But what Qureshi also pointed out, that internet availability in Bihar is close to 37%. So the conventional mode and the new mode, both will work. And all election commission has to do be fair. Election commission shouldn't do more, because we don't want the power of election commissions to be enhanced. We don't want another body, another Frankenstein which is there. There are already home ministry, there are already so many agencies over there. It should be just a regulatory body and maybe an active body, which Lingdo called a pitcher, because it sets the thing. And they take an initiative. Remember Lingdo's initiative in Gujarat after 2002, right? They put the foot down and they said, no, you cannot have election because things are not normal. Or Lingdo's intervention in Jammu Kashmir openly said, So some of these initiatives are important so that the fair play it has to be there.
There is a question. There are 3 questions from Deepak to Anupama ji. And he's asking that you are reflecting that EC as an institution is weakening. Is it true also that these institutions are organic in nature and degeneration is supposed to happen?
Sorry, Dhananjay, just repeat that question.
He is asking that is it true also that these institutions are organic in nature and degeneration is supposed to happen? Do you also see that there is a strengthening of other institutions? And is it not enough for democracy that there are institutions itself? And he is saying that, do you think there is a lack of democratic understanding among the all institutions? I mean, lots of, some questions you have answered, but some needs.
Yeah. Okay. It's a difficult question, and I'm trying to, think through it. Whether institutions should or do necessarily degenerate in correspondence with the kind of degeneration happens around them. So that would be one way of responding, that institutions would, in an institutional space that is eroding, institutions would reflect that erosion too. But institutions can also be resilient in terms of how they interpret their roles. So the Election Commission, for example, and I'm thinking about a corresponding debate around the parliament that happened through the 1990s, around a very normative concern of the decline of parliament. And much of those questions were raised because of the way in which the composition of the parliament itself had changed in correspondence with the churning that had taken place in the political process. So the decline argument was a loaded argument for the parliament, and you had people like Yogendra Yadav saying that it has increased the pool of representatives that we have. So, and Valerian Rodriguez saying that it is the representative content of the parliament that has enhanced. So there would be perhaps two views of looking at institutions in terms of the decay and regeneration. And when I think of the Election Commission as an institution, I think it's perfectly placed to be resilient and not to give in to the erosive tendencies around the institution. And the resilience actually comes from the way in which the institution has historically evolved. But it also comes from how the election commissioners have themselves over a period of time looked at the options that they have, again thinking within the framework of historical institutionalism, the kind of positive reinforcements that have associated itself with the Election Commission, which has nothing to do with the kind of decisions that were taken earlier, but the reinforcements that come from the people themselves. So there is then a possibility of the Election Commission not reflecting the decay in the larger institutional space of democracy. And I always tend to be very hopeful, and thinking about Indian democracy. So that's how I would respond.
We'll take three more. Yes.
So partly I'll add to that in a sense. See, one thing we have to be very clear that Elections Commission task is limited. So even say election bond, it is legislation coming from Parliament. Election Commission can only caution because it has to see there's a fair play, right? But it's so many things are coming from Parliament or judiciary. So judicial verdict actually explains. You can actually see last 6 months what has happened. Most of the cases where Union of India is involved, the cases have favored the government, right? So then you see a trend over there. Now, Election Commission, very fact it has to just ensure procedural certainty so that outcomes are certain. So it's a non-partisan body and it has to be a non-partisan body. So if Election Commission's fair play and has ensured that left front loses and TMC comes, or TMC loses and left front comes, fine. That's not the concern it has. Its main concern should be electoral rolls. Absolutely important. Electoral rolls are these most important part of it. That if you start playing with that, there's a huge crisis. Its main concern should be about participation. And this, interestingly, Indian Election Commission is so proactive in terms of sweep program. And you could see the challenge for deeper, larger framework of democracy, what we still talk in terms of 60s, 65% or maximum 69% participation, whereas we have to look in terms of 80 or 90% participation.
Germany.
Right? So there lies some serious work which Election Commission has. So Election Commission will be judged by the participation of voters, the fair play system where, the rules are not against any player which comes in, and that he can do only at limited extent, and ensure the sanctity of electoral rolls. And I'm emphasizing this because, Deepak, in years to come, the real challenge would be to actually see whether our electoral rolls are intact or not, whether they have actually been revised and there is no exclusion process. That will be the real challenge in decades to come.
We'll take 2, 3, and it is up to you. How would you tackle those? One is, again, I'm taking Siddharth's second question. He is talking about what do you say about institutionalization of undemocratic certainties. I mean, and this is interesting. And there is a question from Jyotsna that are we losing its independence as time passed by, or do we need some radical reform? These are the two questions together.
Second one I didn't get.
Has Election Commission been losing its independence as time passed by? Do we need some radical reform? This was the second.
Undemocratic uncertainties. Undemocratic uncertainties, Dhananjay? Undemocratic certainties. Uncertainties, yeah.
Certainties.
Sorry?
Undemocratic certainties.
Undemocratic certainties, yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of reversing what the framework within which Election Commission is expected to function. And yes, the democratic outcomes will be there only when there is certainty of procedures. So if there is no certainty, then no procedural certainty, then there would be certainty of outcome. And there is then in Siddharth's question a suggestion that because of what the various things that Ujjwal talked about in the context of Bihar elections and in the context of electoral bonds, etc., there seem to be undemocratic certainties, and therefore the outcome would also be perhaps certain and therefore undemocratic. It's a possibility, but again, if we think of a situation where the Election Commission would be functioning in a way that it would ensure certainties of procedure in terms of ensuring that the parties get equal time to campaign, the parties get the same platforms to campaign, the parties have similar resources, and that would be the ideal context, and that also is not an achievable context. So and that has always been the case, more so now than before. But even earlier, there was never, even when there were certainties about undemocratic certainties, the outcome was never certain. And the emergency, post-emergency election is one example. 2014 is another example of how the outcomes were uncertain, even when there were some undemocratic certainties. So that is a combination that one works with, and it's a principle of electoral governance which is set out as a normative principles to ensure a democratic governance.
Let me just add to this. Basic political science tells us in a democratic society, elections are pathway to bring about change. Right? It's constitutional path and also democratic path. Okay, so maybe there's apprehension, and rightly so, that A or B party which is coming to power is insensitive. It's coming because of growing hatred, majoritarianism, where minority rights have not been protected. These are all valid points. But because of that, we cannot abandon the path which is path through change through elections. And this is a modern democracy. When it started elections in the United States, this is how it happened. First, the transition over there. So you have election as a path, and then the transition where any regime which is in power will give way to another regime peacefully, not through bloodshed as such. So that we have to understand that if outcomes are actually known, then this pathway is under crisis. This path of democratic change is under crisis. So one shouldn't prioritize the outcome over the way, where the means as such. An election commission in that sense reflect that path, the means through which it's. So it has to be non-partisan body. It has to be non-ideological body. It has to follow the letter of the law. Many would critique that this is a mechanical equality, where everyone gets so much of time, everyone gets time on TV or this and that. So it may look like that because resources are uneven, but Election Commission of India, and that would really require a huge reform where it's not Election Commission of India, it's political parties have to come together and say, this is not the way to go to fund things. There has to be different ways of funding, right? Different way of mobilization of fund. So onus is not Election Commission of India. Election Commission of India actually would follow the laws passed by Parliament and rules and regulations. So what we are doing when we're saying undemocratic certainties, and the question mark which is there, we are overloading Election Commission of India with our expectation, which we shouldn't be doing it. It has to function in a manner which law prescribes. So it can do a bit of transferring one official, passing censure, indictment of an official or member. Beyond that, it has to be fought in the electoral arena. So political parties are legitimate groups, right? In terms of groups which are part of Indian democracy and any democracy, it's political parties. So they will have to take the call. They will have to fight. They will have to mobilize. So in that sense, we have to, whether organically and one institution, another institution, and whether there's inevitability of decline. No, there's always ups and downs. There's always that the critical moment. So, for example, if we are able to conduct elections in Bihar during COVID time, fine, population of Bihar would be bigger than Sri Lanka and other countries which have done. That could be effectively role model for many other countries. So, Election Commission has new challenges. How it's able to get it done, not only through its own resources, but with civil society groups as such, and with also political parties cooperating together. So Election Commission of India, like any other body, also has to take up new challenges. But if you look at the past, Election Commission of India has on many occasions came with flying colors. Gujarat, Kashmir, a good example. It has, really nosedived when it came to Delhi, Assam, right? When it completely closed its eyes to massacre which happened. So there is an uneven process as such. Yeah.
Now, since we don't have time, but if you would like to, I just flag those questions to you. One is one from Facebook, that how you look at global populism and Indian democracy. And second, these are very large and different set of questions. And second, by Chintu Kumari, and Chintu says that since there is a crumbling of democratic institution, and we were always taught by intellectuals that we should fight through democratic institution. So what is way out now? These are the things.
Yeah, so remember, And Chintu rightly pointed out that, we in the cities, in colleges, in our schools, we talk about constitution, we refer to preamble, but probably we are very little part of this whole process, because when anti-CA protesters were, taking pledge of the preamble, when they were carrying the copy of the constitution, which Chintu knows, these are the moments when you feel a different kind of India which is there, right? And then this whole onslaught comes in, cases are filed, they are kind of criminalize all these movements. But these are the dialectics of the entire process as such. We in our universities, we are in our colleges, will have to keep on talking about constitution, its values, right? Because we can't be cynical. We can't ask our younger members of polity who are coming up to take any other path, right? Rightly so, in our resident welfare association, in our municipal corporations, so I'm talking about the smaller village panchayats. We see all kind of deformities. We see Bahubali is playing an important role, but see, we have to trust our process called elections, right? So we know that in Arunachal there's a different process which happens. In some of the panchayat elections, it's actually auction. We know that it all comes in newspapers, all these stories as such. But we have to keep on hammering about that values, right? There's no other way. We have to keep on saying, and that's why Election of Commission of India also will be alert. Only we have to raise the questions. We have to ask questions. Fine? Is it fair? Shouldn't you be asking? Because any institution, if you keep on asking, they do respond. It's not only RTI, it's about our movement, our processes as such. So I think we have gone a long way, and we still have complete faith that things are bound to change. Things will change for better. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am, for your discussion and interesting talk on this topic. And I think that three things were there, and they were aptly answered and debated. That question of access, neoliberalism and institution in India, and centralization of polity and institutional autonomy. And I think that your presentation and your discussion, and I think the book is locating institution as a part of the democratization. You are nowhere suggesting that institution per se lead to democratization process, but democratization, they could be part of a larger democratization of the Indian society. And this is one of the favorite, I mean, there are many, but paragraph from your book, and particularly from introduction, which tells a lot about the essence and the summary of the book. I read it, and it takes just 30 seconds to complete it. In order for rules and procedures of electoral governance to be conducive to democracy, they should generate a radical uncertainty about authority through certainty of procedures. Such procedures give momentum to participation and release processes of critique that question and subvert all certainties of social life, lead to mobilization of new groups, unsettle existing power relations, and produce new opening. Thank you so much for your debate and discussion. Over to you, Pranav.
Thank you to Anveshan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Anveshan, I'd like to thank Professor Anupama and Professor Ujjwal, and also Dhananjay for taking out time for this, and all the participants. So we will keep organizing such talks and discussions, and we hope to see you for them also. So the link for today's talk will be available on our YouTube channel. I sent the link for our YouTube channel on the chat box. So those of you who are interested in revisiting the talk, you'll find it there probably tomorrow. We'll upload it tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.